Good evening, everyone. We are pleased to have our opening musical performance today by Monroe Crossing. Monroe Crossing performs an electrifying blend of classic bluegrass, bluegrass gospel, original bluegrass, and some surprising selections outside of the bluegrass genre. Named in honor of Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass music, they've been together for more than 20 years. They average over 100 shows a year throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. The group utilizes a cadre of talented banjo players, all of whom are alumni of the group. And in 2007, they were inducted into the Minnesota Music Hall of Fame. They love introducing newcomers to bluegrass music. And lest I take any more time that we might be enjoying their music, I will turn it over to Monroe Crossing.
It's like a dull edge of a knife, always right but never knowing. It's a mixed up world, you know it's true. Spinning around and round, feels like there's nothing you can do. It's easy to get lost when you don't know where you're going. Game that you play when your cards are always showing. They've got their aces facing up, and you know you should be folding. Oh, life is a gamble, you know it's true. Spinning spinning round and round, feels like there's nothing you can do. It's easy to get lost when you don't know where you're going. Rolling in, started small, but now it's growing. It's a crazy mess to be in, was a drip, now it's flowing. It's a mixed up world, you know it's true. Spinning round and round, feels like there's nothing you can do. It's easy to get lost when you don't know where you're going. Yes, it's easy to get lost when you don't know where you're going.
Hey everybody, good evening. Thank you so much. We're very happy to be here. We're Monroe Crossing. We got a call a couple weeks ago and they asked, do we like democracy? And we took a vote and said yes. So that's why we're here. Anyways, we're short of our 25th year as a band, and we heard at year 30 it becomes profitable, so 5 more years, and we're set. Retirement, maybe. Anyways, that last song was written by our guitar player. It's easy to get lost when you don't know where you're going. And then we started off with that beautiful love ballad, the Mule Skinner Blues. Oh, yeah. Yes. Here's a song that our fiddle player wrote. It's called Into the Fire. 1, 2, 3.
against the false man. Take a step for God and land.
Step into the fire.
Step into the fire. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They went into the fire. They went into the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Hey, we're going to do a song about a train. That's a favorite subject in bluegrass music ever since Roy Acuff and his Smoky Mountain Boys wrote about the Wabash Cannonball. Later, there's a song recorded by Jim and Jesse and the Virginia Boys called The Diesel Train, updating things a little bit. And then Lisa and her husband Mark, who's the bass player here, wrote this song about the bullet train. Now, we don't have any bullet trains in the U.S. yet. We rode one when we were in South Korea. And the song is nothing like a real bullet train, because bullet trains are really quiet and smooth, and the song is really loud and raucous. But anyways, enjoy. It's called The Bullet Train. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2.
Wanna ride that bullet train, Vegas to LA. A 45-minute glide without touching the rail. Gotta get to the station, wanna get on board. Bullet train. 300 miles an hour while flying just to move off the ground. Some fuel fury pulling us out of the clouds. That live rocket sled ahead we sped on the bullet train. Let's ride the bullet train. Son of the zephyr that taught the world what speed means. Come home, cruise, get down in American jeans. It's the pride of a nation, pulling in the station. It's a bullet train. Ride that train. Let's ride that bullet train.
Ride the 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 bullet train.
Come on now.
Thank you. For those of you who came in late, just before the show, we had everyone stand up and tell your name and what your favorite thing about bluegrass is. So, should we start over here? Oh, I'm just kidding.
Well, I was hanging out in the hammock one day last summer with our 70-pound pit bull rescue, half pit bull, half beagle, and he likes music and likes to ride in a hammock, and this melody came to mind. So I put some words to it that are really turned out to be our prayer for all of us in this very trying time, and unironically and appropriately, it's called Hammock Dog. I wish for you a quiet place where you can while away your time as you want to. You hold them near and see it through. Go on doing what it is that you care to. Time and turn and pass along, gather up the days, happy like a hammock dog swaying in the shade. I wish for you a gentle stream, birds that perch along the banks of the tranquil, a sunlit cove and apple dreams, joy that lifts and heals and helps to be sanguine. Time and turn and pass along, gather up the days, happy like a hammock dove swaying in the shade. Hey, 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 hey. I wish for you a tree-lined path that dips and rises up to interest your journey. And you decide which way you'll go. A world thorough and frost illumined in the writing. Time and turn and pass along, gather up the days, happy like a hammock dove swinging in the shade. Time and turn and pass along, gather up the days, happy like a hammock dove swinging in the shade. Hey, 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 hey.
Thank you. Well, we've done a lot of traveling throughout the years in Monroe Crossing, and it's brought us from coast to coast and over to Europe 4 different times, and been to Canada, and we're headed to the Yukon in next June, if you can believe that. Yeah. South Korea? We've been to South Korea as well, but on many occasions I've driven on my own and done some sightseeing along the way, and one year I had time to take a tour of the Gettysburg battlefield. And it's an amazing historical site. I think every American should visit there. And I was standing on a place called Cemetery Ridge and found myself right next to the a monument to the 1st Minnesota Volunteers, and learned more about their contribution to that battle. And I felt I had to write this song. This is called "The Ballad of the 1st Minnesota Volunteers." Day 2 at Gettysburg, Devil Dan lost his mind. He marched his New York brigade, a mile in front of the Union line. The devil, he was proud. He had his own plan of attack. But after a little while, the devil's men came running back. Cemetery Ridge, it was the center of it all. And now the Union line was threatening to fall. General Hancock was determined, no, he could not lose the day. He needed a little more time before it all slipped away. Alabama, she was knocking on the Yankees' door. General Wilcox and his grays washed up like waves upon the shore. That's when the boys from Minnesota, they heard their number called, and they formed a battle line, and they ran into that wall. Every man knew what the order meant: death and destruction to the entire regiment. They ran into that horror to save a little time, time to say your prayers and try to hold the Union line. They ran on down that hill when Colonel Colville gave the call, and in a few minutes' time, most of them would fall. Their colors fell 5 times, 5 times it rose again. 47 men remained to see reinforcements come marching in. Every man knew what the order meant: death and destruction to the entire regiment. They ran into that horror to save a little time, time to say your prayers and try to hold the Union line. They all said their prayers and they held the Union line.
Oh, thank you, everybody. Something we'd like to invite you to do with us. We are a smart bluegrass band who goes south for the winter, and we go all the way south to the Bahamas. We're going to do Florida and the Bahamas, and we do, in January, we do a bluegrass cruise with Danny Stewart's Bluegrass Cruises. It's 5 days, 4 nights, food, lodging, bluegrass. There's jams, there's workshops, there's sing-alongs. If you pick, bring your instrument, carry it on with you, and we'll all be jamming all over the boat. It's a lot of fun. So, it's on our website, monroecrossing.com. Should we do the theme song real quick? Yeah. Go to monroecrossing.com and join us on the cruise in 2025. Thank you, folks.
Ooh-wee, ooh-wee, baby, ooh-wee, ooh-wee, baby, ooh-wee, ooh-wee, baby. Won't you let me take you on a sea cruise? If while the banjos, fiddles out on the open sea. Ooh-wee, ooh-wee, baby, ooh-wee, ooh-wee, baby, ooh-wee, ooh-wee, baby, won't you let me take you on a sea cruise?
Join us in 2025.
All right. Thank you. Anyone remember that song, Sea Cruise? That's a goodie. Well, I guess we have time to quickly introduce everybody. On the bass fiddle, Mark Anderson. On the guitar, Derek Johnson. On the mandolin, I'm Matt Thompson. Have you noticed the theme so far? Anderson, Johnson, Thompson. We also occasionally have a Robinson in the band too, so we're from Minnesota, yes sir. Back on the fiddle, Lisa Fugly. And the guy in the banjo is so new, I gotta check his name again. Jake what? Oh, Jake Ashworth. It's good to have you with us. Jake Ashworth on the banjo. He's new. Well, every once in a while, people will come up to us and say, "Can you play a song that we know so we can tell if you're good or not?" I bet some of you remember the 60s. Okay, this is for you. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I thought love was only true in fairy tales, meant for someone else, but not for me. Love is out to get me, that's the way you see. Disappointment shattered all my dreams. Then I saw her face, now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love, I'm a believer, I couldn't leave her if I tried. I thought love was more or less a giving thing. The more I gave, the less I got, oh yeah. What's the use in trying? Oh, all you get is pain. When I wanted sunshine, I got rain. Then I saw her face, now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love, I'm a believer, I couldn't leave her if I tried. What's the use in trying? Oh, all you get is pain. When I wanted sunshine, I got rain. Then I saw her face, now I'm a believer, not a trace left out in my blood. I'm in love, I'm a believer, I couldn't leave her if I tried. Then I saw her face, now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. Then I saw her face, and I'm a believer, I'm not a trace of doubt in my
Thank you to Monroe Crossing. Good evening. My name is Megan Gagefin, and I serve Westminster as the Senior Associate Pastor, and it is good to welcome you here to this space this evening and to this evening's forum. Westminster has been the home to the Town Hall Forum since 1980, and we are thrilled to welcome you back for our fall season. We're grateful you're here. I hope that you'll take time after the program to enjoy our spaces, tour the art gallery, stop by the library, and of course, gather in Westminster Hall for our Breads and Spreads reception. And I would now like to introduce this evening's guest moderator, Michael Kleber-Diggs. Michael is a poet, essayist, literary critic, and arts educator. He is the author of the memoir, My Weight in Water. Michael's debut poetry collection, Worldly Things, won the Max Ritvo Poetry Prize, and currently he is the Jerome Hill Artist Fellow in Literature and teaches creative writing at Augsburg University and through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. We thank him for guest moderating, and please join me in welcoming this evening's moderator, Michael Kleber-Diggs.
Welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum. I'm Michael Kleber-Diggs, and I'm also a member of the Town Hall Forum Advisory Board. And as was just announced, I'm the guest moderator for today's forum with Bob Bauer. We are pleased, it's so great to hear the music of Monroe Crossing. Let's give them another round of applause, please. This is our first program in the forum's fall season, which is themed Democracy in America. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank the media sponsors of today's program. MinnPost is a nonpartisan, reader-supported source of Minnesota news. Visit them online at minnpost.com. Yeah. Thanks as well to Sahan Journal, celebrating 5 years of nonprofit journalism for and about Minnesota's immigrants and communities of color. Visit sahanjournal.com. And the Town Hall Forum is pleased to partner today with Minnesota Public Radio. This is a good moment. This is the part of the program where I remind you to please silence your cell phones so they don't interrupt the broadcast. Thank you so much. When we begin the broadcast, I'll introduce our guest speaker to you and to the radio audience. Bob Bauer will speak for about 25 minutes. In the second half of today's program, Mr. Bauer will take questions from the audience. Those of you who are with us in the sanctuary, you will fill in blank question cards and we'll gather those. And you can find them in your program. We'll use that to record the questions and then I'll share them with Bob. If you're watching online, please write your questions into the chat under the video at any point. We'll also collect and present those as time allows. Following today's presentation, join us for Breads and Spreads in the Westminster Hall, located to your right as you exit the sanctuary. For more than 40 years, the Westminster Town Hall Forum has invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. Today is the kickoff for a new season at the Town Hall Forum. This fall, we present a three-part series called Democracy in America. Coming up on October 22nd, Larry Jacobs, director of the Center for Politics and Governance at the University of Minnesota, will examine the historic forces within America's party system that he argues have, over time, dangerously weakened democracy, widening political inequality as well as racial disparities, and rewarding toxic political polarization. Mr. Jacobs offers recommendations to restrain the unbridled ambition of politicians who thrive on division and instead generate broad citizen engagement with tangible policymaking. And last but not least, on November 14th, McKenna Kelly, political reporter for Wired, will be here to address social media and how influencers are playing a bigger role in our lives and our politics than they did in the 2020 election. She will explain the rise of influencers and dissect the impact they've had in this fall's presidential election. This post-election forum on November 14th will be interesting to those of you who are social media savvy, as well as those of you who might ask, what's an influencer? We invite you to visit our website, westminsterforum.org, to see a list of upcoming programs and to view past programs. One last note before we begin. This is a critically important time for the Forum. Today's program and everything the Town Hall Forum does is made possible by supporters like you. Donations from individuals are far and away the largest source of the funding for the program. In short, the Forum doesn't happen without supporters like you. If you can, please support the Forum. For those of you here in person, there are donation envelopes in your programs. If you're watching the live stream, you can go to westminsterforum.org/donate. Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, where for more than 40 years we have invited speakers of conscience to address issues of the day from an ethical perspective. My name is Michael Kleber-Diggs, and I'm a member of the Town Hall Forum Advisory Board and guest moderator for today's forum. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker. Bob Bauer, attorney, graduated from Phillips Exeter Academy in 1970. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Harvard College in 1973 and his Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law in 1976. Bauer is now on the faculty of the New York University School of Law, teaching political reform and the ethical challenges facing lawyers in public life. Bob Bauer has been involved in many of the biggest political struggles in the 5 decades since the post-Watergate 1970s. He has been a leading legal advisor to the National Democratic Party and to its candidates on strategies for winning elections and protecting voting rights. And he has represented the party in national political conflicts and controversies. He was the chief counsel to both of President Obama's presidential campaigns and was the president's White House Counsel. He was counsel to the Democratic Senate leader during Bill Clinton's impeachment trial. He was a senior advisor to the Biden presidential campaign on voting rights and election protection and on vice presidential selection. His most recent book is The Unraveling. Published in June of 2024, The Unraveling is the first book to place restoring political ethics at the center of the renewal of American democracy. He presents a smart and serious look at our political culture and the role that he has played in shaping it. Politics is a brutal game, but Bauer asked, where does the line fall between the hardball of politics and the attacks on the very foundation of democracy? Please help me in welcoming to the Westminster Town Hall Forum, Bob Bauer.
Thank you very much for attending today, and I want to thank the Westminster Forum for issuing the invitation and all of those at the Forum who have arranged this so splendidly well, so efficiently, and I've been very welcomed, and I appreciate it. So the subtitle of the book is Politics Without Ethics and Democracy in Crisis, and I want to talk a little bit about what the book is about. Then I want to discuss some unique features of the book rooted in the approach that I took, because the book is somewhat of a memoir, but not entirely a memoir, certainly not an autobiography. And then I want to talk a little bit about where we are now, where this book has led me, and how I think about what I, in thinking about ethics and politics, want to be able to do next, how I think about it now, where I think ethics and politics, the role that ethics and politics plays in our public life. So as I said, it's not a memoir, it's not an autobiography, it's a memoir in part, because I decided to build what I had to say for a reason I'm about to give you around certain experiences and reflections on those experiences that I've had over the course of a long career. You wouldn't guess it from the youthful demeanor that I project, but I'm 72 years old. And I have been in the legal profession since 1976. And for the most of the following decades until the present day, I've been involved in politics in one form or another. Michael has given you a couple of examples. I was in the government as White House Counsel to President Obama. I've been in presidential campaigns as a lawyer for those campaigns, and to various office holders who were running for election or re-election, including President Biden in 2020. I've also served on presidential commissions, one on election administration, one on the Supreme Court of the United States. The first such commission was established by President Obama, the second on the Supreme Court by President Biden. And I've done any number of things, largely on the partisan side of the divide, helping my side win, and I want to come back to that in a moment, but always with some attention, and in the book I criticize the degree of attention I may have paid, to where the law falls between, or excuse me, where the line falls between what everybody in competitive politics wants to do, mainly win, and on the other side of that line, not doing everything you might do to win, because winning is not everything in a democracy. There are costs to the attempt to win at all costs. I refer to it in the book as the warrior mentality. Partisans going to war to win elections, and it's particularly easy for them to lose sight of the ethical boundaries in politics when the stakes of particular political competitions are very, very high. When, as in a term that you hear a lot now, the outcome of a particular election is viewed as existential insignificance, an enormous amount is riding on it, then it is natural for both political parties and even those outside the party political system to worry just about who won and who lost, and not necessarily so much about what has happened to the democracy through the way in which they did win or they did lose. So I want to talk about what I mean by ethics in politics, because some people would say potentially, well, I don't know what in the world you could possibly mean by bringing the two, ethics and politics, together. So I want to give you a rough, for my purposes here and for purposes of the book, a rough definition. Politics is a rough business. There is hard-fought political competition that we value and that is essential to the resolution of major disputes in our body politic. But it is also politics, on the part of those who practice it, a vocation that carries with it ethical responsibilities. And what defines those responsibilities? Well, many of you have heard in recent years about norms of democratic self-governance. And what is a norm of democratic self-governance? Well, some of you may be familiar with a book written on just this topic by two political scientists, Ziblatt and Levitsky. The book is entitled How Democracies Die. And they give a couple of examples of norms that are indispensable to the conduct of politics in a democratic society. One is mutual toleration. We accept that there are people in the society who disagree with us, and sometimes very strongly disagree, but we tolerate that disagreement. We welcome it as part of what is necessary for a democratic society to define and then resolve the issues that separate us. Another is institutional forbearance. What is institutional forbearance? It is the ability of those who exercise power to understand there are certain things that they can do with that power that they should not do with that power. There's a zone of discretion that they exercise in wielding that power, and they must exercise that discretion thoughtfully. What then are political ethics? Political ethics are the choices that are made every day, every week, every month, throughout the year by people in government and in politics, choices that they make in particular situations that define whether or not those norms are satisfied, met, respected, honored, or eroded. The political opponent, who was once just an opponent, becomes an enemy. And the miscarriage of ethics in that circumstance is to treat those who disagree with you as an enemy and look not to win the trust of the people in fair competition, but to destroy your enemy, to vanquish your enemy. Another example is the acceptance that in any democratic society, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. If you lose an election, there's another election around the corner that you build toward winning, but you accept that you can lose an election. Lies and manipulation of voters in particular. Politics is a game in which you hear politicians say all sorts of things floridly that they probably know isn't entirely true. They puff up their backgrounds. They sometimes puff up their promises. How many people complain about hearing politicians make promises that somewhere intuitively the voters don't think they can ever meet, or discover later that they didn't meet? But that's part and parcel of sort of politics that we can accept. Just a little bit of puffery, a little bit of exaggeration, just politics, if you will, which is different than outright lying to the voters, outright manipulation of the voters, which is another way of expressing disrespect for voters. And the rule of law. That we have laws in this country, some of which constrain the conduct of politics, but just generally speaking, laws on which the democracy rests foundationally. And respect for the rule of law is a critical commitment that anybody in politics, government, or politics must make. It's a commitment that they must keep. So ethics, for my purposes, in my definition, ethics are the choices that are made to sustain, invigorate norms, or if those ethical choices are poorly made, to begin to lay waste to them, weaken them, cause them to be eroded. And as I look back over my own career, I thought, well, I ought to approach this topic honestly, because I have been a partisan warrior. Incidentally, I'm a hardcore Democrat. I don't apologize for that. I cast my ballot today, and I can guarantee you, without in any way disregarding the requirements of a secret ballot, anybody who has read my bio knows who I voted for. No secret about it. Nor did I have any second thoughts, even though the ballot presented me with all sorts of choices. I knew which choice I was going to make. But in order for this conversation about ethics to proceed, and keeping in mind what I just said about mutual tolerance, it is important to put your own priors on the table, your own biases, your own prejudices, your own experiences, your own mistakes, the way you did things to win that you look back on and decide you could have done differently, and by the way, still have won. I reject the idea, because I don't believe it's true based on my own experience, that the only way to win an election is the wrong way to win an election. I don't think that's true. And I do not have the lack of faith in the American electorate that would lead me to that conclusion. So I thought I'll write a memoir in which I will put out strong views, including some self-criticism. And I'll give you here a few examples and leave you to decide how much of it you may want to read in the book. In the battle for partisan control of the House of Representatives, party control of the House of Representatives some years back, when I detected on behalf of my client what I thought was an illegal campaign finance scheme that was going to be used by our adversaries to win an election unfairly, or at least finance it unfairly, I devised a unique legal theory, which was I was going to build my campaign finance case not on campaign finance law, but on campaign finance law vindicated or enforced through the racketeering statutes that were not, in fact, passed for that purpose, and filed, by the way, with a little bit of success, a racketeering lawsuit that named as one of the principal defendants the then majority whip of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives. And there was a little bit of an outcry that this was pretty hardball politics, very hardball politics, and that it advanced sort of this polarized, nose-to-nose, ruthless competition between the two political parties. I look back on it and I ask myself, you know what, we should have thought about that maybe a little bit more. We should have discussed whether or not that was a step we really needed to take. That's one example. Another example I give in the book is that in bringing cases, again, using this example, matters of campaign finance, where each party is eyeing nervously the other party and worrying that it will not have the resources to succeed, or it will have less in the way of resources than its opponent, I and other lawyers decided to bring the donors to candidates and parties into the legal process to ask for investigations of campaign finance violations by those who took in the money, but to suck into that process and thereby, frankly, intimidate the people who were giving them the money. And now, in some cases, these were major wealthy people who had reason to believe that they were underwriting sketchy operations. But when you start to spread the attack out that way, and you're reaching the people who are not the politicians or the consultants or the political operators, but the people who are being asked to contribute to support a political cause, that is an escalation. That is an escalation, and there have been examples of that long since the examples I give in the book. I wouldn't say the example I give of my own activities is the worst of all the examples, but it's in the zone of the sort of thing you have to ask yourself about. Where does the political warfare, what are the limits on the political warfare? Where does the political warfare stop? What are the boundary lines? I also talk about some of the mistakes I made when I was thinking about advancing the public policies of the Obama administration, mistakes that I made in what I thought was the very honorable business of doing whatever I could as a counsel to the president to advance his public policy objectives. And let me be very quick to say, there's nothing in all of these confessions that suggests that, I did anything of the worst kind. I'm not here to tell you that I was a lawyer on par with the lawyers in the Watergate episode during the Nixon administration who met with great grief because they operated on the wrong side of the law very clearly. I'm talking about ethical choices here. I'm not talking about what you can do versus what you should do. And I give examples of that as well. And I talk a good bit in the book about lawyers in particular, because politics in the United States is a somewhat regulated industry. It's not a fully regulated industry, and some of the regulations that have been enacted to control, say, money in politics haven't worked all that terribly well. But nonetheless, lawyers are as ubiquitous in politics as they are in any other facet of American life, and that includes the role that lawyers play and that I'm currently playing, for example, in the attempt to ensure that the next election is properly prepared for and all eligible voters can freely participate. Their votes can be counted, and as you probably know from reading the papers day in and day out, this is a highly litigated space now. There are lawyers all over the place fighting about voting rules, and I've been involved in that. I'd like to think on the right side of that, but it just goes to show lawyers are so involved in politics, and therefore the ethics of their involvement, the choices that they make, along with the choices of candidates, along with the choices of people who raise money, along with the choices of consultants who write the advertisements, those choices help either to advance or to weaken the status of norms, critical norms in democratic self-governance. So where am I now in my work in this area? I do teach law, and I'm still very active in Democratic Party politics, and I almost surely will be until, I finally select the rocking chair that I will occupy to tell my stories. But I also believe very strongly that Democrats and Republicans have to find common ground where they can around fundamental commitments to the democratic process. And so as a result, at the same time as I'm working on partisan political matters, I'm also working on nonpartisan voting rights matters with Republicans. And I co-chair two organizations with a long-standing Republican lawyer named Ben Ginsberg. He represented Mitt Romney, the Republican nominee for president in 2012, in the same election in which I represented President Obama. And we were nose to nose. In fact, we met in 1982 in a recount in which I represented the Democrat against a challenge to that Democrat's election to the House. For the record, and I remind Ben of this, my candidate won. Just saying. But Ben is an outstanding lawyer. He also, as strongly as he feels about his Republican politics, as strongly surely as I feel about my Democratic politics, he believes that there are fundamental norms, and they include, among other things, this commitment to the democratic selection process, to the electoral process, to the means by which we come together as a nation and make choices of our leadership at the polls. Eligible voters all participating and supported in that extraordinary moment where they rule. They rule directly in the casting of their ballots. And we now have a situation in this country where our election officials, the people who are putting on our elections, under ceaseless attack. And I spent a lot of time with Ben talking to election officials around the country, including during the period when we were co-chairs of President Obama's Presidential Commission on Election Administration. And we've gone around the country and we've seen how much work with limited resources these officials do to put on an election that the public can have confidence. And yes, there can be disputes about the outcome. There are contest and recount processes that are provided under law that permit candidates to challenge outcomes. But the basic systems in place here deserve respect, and the work of election officials in constructing and administering those systems deserve respect. And yet, they're facing unprecedented challenges, mass resignations, mass early retirements, under this tremendous pressure from those who would say that our elections process can't be trusted, the public shouldn't have any confidence in it, the outcome is rigged. So we co-chair one organization called the Election Official Legal Defense Network that provides any election official who needs it for his or her legal defense against personal attack, against attack from a hostile state legislature, provides them with pro bono legal counsel. And we co-chair an organization called Pillars of the Community, in which we go to states and we ask community leaders, those who lead our major businesses, those who lead our major institutions, religious institutions, community colleges, veterans organizations, across the entire sector of civil society leadership. We bring them together with election officials to talk about how the elections are prepared for, to answer any questions that those leaders will have, so they can return to their community, all of them, Democrats or Republicans, but in their capacity as trusted voices in the community, and reassure their citizenry, their neighbors, their networks, that the electoral process is not rigged. There'll be disagreements about outcomes, but it is a process the public can have confidence in because there are professionals who are every day constructing the voting systems and administering the voting systems that we need for these elections to take place. I think this is an ethical undertaking. I think it's something Democrats and Republicans should do, and I think they should be listening to each other on this topic, and they should be looking past their differences and saying, well, we may have profound differences about regulation or tax policy, but we can have differences about this, about what it means for voters to be lied to, what it means for election systems to be attacked in the fashion that I just described. So that's what I've been doing. I want to say just in conclusion here quickly, and then I'm happy to take your questions. In my teaching as a law professor, I also focus on what lawyers should do. And in any conversation about ethics, we should definitely focus on what lawyers should do. And one of the provisions of the Model Code of Professional Responsibility adopted across the country by many state bars, of particular interest to me is Rule 2.1 of the Model Code, which provides as follows, and I'm going to read it. In representing a client, a lawyer shall exercise independent professional judgment and render candid advice. In rendering advice, a lawyer may refer not only to law, but to considerations such as moral, economic, social, and political factors that may be relevant to the client's situation. Not just law, but other considerations like ethical considerations, moral considerations, the broader impact of pathways that may be legal on the people who will be affected by it. And in our democratic society in particular, for a political lawyer, those who will be affected by it as citizens in a democratic society. And the comment to that rule states very specifically that advice that is couched in purely or narrow legal terms may be of little value, especially where practical considerations such as the cost or effects on other people, are predominant. And so, although, the comment goes on to say, the lawyer is not a moral advisor as such, and most of you don't think of going to your lawyer for moral advice, I understand that, moral and ethical considerations impinge upon most legal questions and may decisively influence how the law will be applied. So those are the ethical issues that I work with my students on, with particular reference to how lawyers in public and political life ought to be thinking about what it means to advise their clients when the impact of their advice about winning elections, advice about challenging elections, advice about how you treat the opposition, what it means to win and distinguishing winning by appropriate means versus winning by inappropriate means. Those are the issues that I would like my students to be thinking about as they prepare for hopefully a leadership position in their communities. I will close with the following. In the book, I talk a lot about my father. He was a refugee from Nazi Austria. He left Austria the day the Germans marched in 1938. He was a political opponent to the regime. He met my mother in flight out of Austria in Czechoslovakia on his travel through Europe with the Germans hard on his heels. And they married on the way to the United States. And he was 30 years old when he arrived and developed a passionate patriotic commitment to the United States because he so profoundly respected its institutions and the way its democracy functioned. And he had an enormous impact on me, and I talk about episodes from his life that I learned a great deal from. But I want to close by just telling, I'm just going to read one passage from the book that relates to this. And I have to preface it by saying, my father had a very balanced view of things. He really cared to hear from other people about their political views, even where there was disagreement. He had a really powerful dislike of Richard Nixon. I grew up in that household, and there was one name that uttered was guaranteed to draw a very, very pronounced and angry response, and that was the name Richard Nixon. But here's what I write about the day that Nixon resigned and my father's reaction to it. When his despised Richard Nixon resigned in the Watergate scandal in August of 1974, I sat with him as he watched Gerald Ford's first words as president from the East Room of the White House. My father wept quietly, moved in this moment not by joy that Nixon was gone, but that the battered institutions of American democracy had proven their resilience, their durability. This family history imprinted upon me these commitments and left me to resolve the occasional tension between them, the commitment to successful political competition and the commitment to a fully ethical politics as respectful of democratic norms. We can have both. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. This is the Westminster Town Hall Forum coming to you from Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis. I'm Michael Kleber-Diggs, and I'm a member of the Town Hall Forum Advisory Board and the guest moderator of today's forum. As you just heard, our speaker is Bob Bauer. While the ushers collect questions from the in-house audience, I'd like to thank our broadcast partner, Minnesota Public Radio. Thanks as well to our other media partners, MinnPost and Sahan Journal. You can watch or listen back to them and all our programs on our website, westminsterforum.org. Now, if you're ready, Mr. Bauer, I will present, well, before we get to the audience questions, I'm going to exert a moment of moderator's privilege and ask a question of my own. I was drawn to your comments about mutual forbearance and mutual toleration and institutional forbearance. It can seem sometimes in today's society that our ability to tolerate our political opponents is not perhaps in abundant supply. And I think that's something that we can all work on. I wonder if you have any thoughts on what should happen if one political party abandons institutional forbearance.
What political party, what?
Abandons institutional forbearance.
A couple of thoughts about that. First of all, I think if one party begins to break away from institutional forbearance, and we could talk about what that might mean in concrete terms, I worry that the lesson to the other political party is not to follow suit, because then we will have an ethical race to the bottom. And I have to continue to have faith that if you can call out that kind of ethical failing at the root of a political party's behavior or beliefs, that at the end of the day, you may not get a majority. Excuse me, let me put it this way. You may not get everybody, 100% of the electorate swung behind you, but you will get a majority. You will get a majority of Americans, and I think a healthy majority of Americans who will say, whatever I think, that's not the way I want our politics to be. And I just go back, Michael, very quickly to my experience with the Pillars organization that I co-chair with Ben Ginsberg. We have closed-door meetings with community leaders who are totally diverse in their political views, and they are sitting there with election officials, and the doors closed initially in these meetings so that nobody has to worry about, what they might be quoted as saying, who's looking over their shoulder. And as strong as some of the convictions on the other side of my beliefs can be, I find after conversation, it's clear that there is still, it may be covered up in a lot of anger and frustration, but there is still a fundamental commitment to democratic values, and I think we can continue to tap into it. So I think we have to call it out, and I think state and local community leadership, and I'm being very clear, I'm not saying Washington, D.C. doesn't have a role to play, but I really do believe that war is going to be fought and won in cities, counties, states, across the country. It's going to be at the community level where leadership in those communities, non-political leadership, becomes activated and rallies the public against the kind of politics that you described.
Thank you. And now some audience questions. Have there been periods in American history when political ethics have been as challenged as now? And if so, how did we come out of it?
Well, first of all, in a country this young, we've had a calamitous breakdown in the politics of the country, namely the Civil War. But we also have had periods of time where I think it's fair to say public office was almost openly for sale. And I'm thinking about Congress in the 19th century, members of Congress who held stock in businesses that were being regulated on issues that they were voting on. So we've gone through various periods of different kinds of ethical failure, if you will, in our politics, sometimes debilitating, sometimes merely weakening. And I come back again, although I do have reasons to worry that our situation today is particularly challenging. I don't want to be naive about that. But I come back to something fundamental, which is I do think that as angry as people can be, as frustrated as people can be, as distrustful as people can be of one another, of the political system, of the institutions of government, when you at least take the time for serious conversation, it does emerge they are not looking to bring the democratic system down. They actually subscribe to the tenets that have to be widely shared for a system like that to thrive and to survive. So I think we can tap into it, and we come out of it by tapping into it. But we're going to need leadership around the country to bring us to that point.
Thank you. Does the structure of the Electoral College with a winner-take-all approach contribute to our current problems with political ethics?
If one of the stresses, of course, of electoral politics in the United States right now is the number of instances in recent American political history when the winner of the Electoral College lost the popular vote. Now, this is my personal opinion. It's just my personal opinion. It's not a political science opinion. It's just a fundamental judgment. I don't think that's a sustainable state of affairs. I do not think that whether it is Democrats on the right side of that popular vote victory or Republicans eventually on the right side of the popular vote victory, I do not think we can continue to see a divergence of the popular vote and the electoral vote with presidents who were elected having lost by millions, sometimes by less, but by millions of votes in the popular vote. I just don't think that's a sustainable arrangement. I think it just is going to wind up fueling the anger over whether or not the system we currently have is indeed one that is worth preserving in its current form. I think it's going to add to distrust. I could be wrong about this. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but it's hard for me to believe that by the time my my grandchildren are school age, so I'm going to give myself a wide horizon here. Who wants to be in front of an audience and fail in a prediction? But then again, I won't be around to face the consequences of my failure. I don't think the Electoral College will be around any longer. Maybe it'll be reformed in some particulars. You mentioned the feature of winner take all. Maybe it will go all together. But it's hard for me to believe that given how Americans picture democratic life and the way our democracy has evolved, that we can continue to have a situation where Electoral College majorities are gained while the popular vote is lost.
Mr. Bauer, I think this question gets to a comment that you made a few moments ago about how, in some ways, this work is going to be done at the city and county level. And this question is, what can the average voter do to help improve the quality of our elections?
Election officials tell me all the time, and by the way, I should just mention, Republican election officials are fully participating in a whole host of programs, not just the ones that my organizations are sponsoring, but a whole host of programs around the country, many of which are longstanding, some of which sprang up after 2016. Election officials on both sides are involved. It's like the Election Official Legal Defense Network that I co-chair has an advisory board of election officials, half of whom are Republicans. What all of them tell you, Democrats and Republicans, is they don't have enough help from people in their communities. They want people to be poll workers. They want people to come in and take tours and learn how things actually work in the polling place, in the way elections are prepared for. Election day counts, the subsequent way that the voting system process is administered all the way through certification to the final conclusion about who won the election. And so for voters to take that kind of interest in their community, to replace, for example, many people who've been poll workers for many years and are, really at an advanced age struggling to stay in a polling place 14, 15 hours a day. And by the way, the pay isn't very good either, to be sure. It would be helpful if they came and said, no, I'll do it. I'll work in the polls. I'll come, to your meetings with other voters and listen to what you have to say and sort of support you in your explanation of the voting process. That level of engagement, even just there, at the level of the fundamental operation of the voting process, would be very, very meaningful. The other thing I want to say very quickly on that, and this is a larger topic and maybe a little less concrete, maybe hopelessly abstract, is that voters need to call out their own side. Take off the team jersey. And if your side is not operating, leaders are operating in a way that may be satisfying to the most extreme partisan, appealing to the most extreme partisan, but really do challenge our sense about how politics are conducted, I think voters have to be heard. Voters do throw out of office politicians who, for example, take money under the table, sort of typical money corruption. That does happen. But some of what we're talking about, like outright lying in advertisements, just the coarsest kind of manipulation of voters through the dissemination of false information that can even include, for example, threats of political violence, that has to be called out so that politicians learn there is a price to be paid for that behavior.
This next question is, how does Project 2025 square with your ethical principles in government? Do you think its authors operate within ethical bounds and norms?
First of all, I have to be honest with you, I don't keep a copy of Project 2025's literature by my bedside, so I can't engage in all this great detail. Also, the Republican nominee has said it doesn't have anything to do with him, and why would I distrust that? But I think that this much I will say. The shrill attacks on government and the desire to wring expertise out of government and to introduce into government political and ideological control is extraordinarily dangerous. Now, political parties, when they win office, on the old saying that elections have consequences, they benefit from holding office. They make appointments, some appointments, for example, to the judiciary that last long past their terms of office have concluded. They're legitimate gains that they have. But to go into a government and seek to essentially hollow it out and turn it into an instrument of a particular ideological or political perspective, and to disdain and devalue expertise, whether that is a view fairly attributed to the authors of 2025 or to others who've expressed it in other quarters, I think is inimical to what we expect of the way those who seek power should exercise it.
What is your opinion on the idea of nationalizing elections? Do you think that's better or worse for the integrity of elections and for the body politic in general?
I'm not sure I understand precisely what nationalizing elections means. I mean, elections are certainly, when I hear that term nationalizing elections, I frequently hear that what that refers to is that national issues wind up dominating the state and local electoral process and the way people view the choices that they make at the state and local level. So everything becomes nationalized. The Republican Party's nationalized around a certain set of issues. Democratic Party's nationalized around a sort of set of issues. Another way I hear it, although I'm not sure this is the intention of the questioner, is should we have, for example, instead of this highly decentralized election system, should we have a national federal elections sort of administrative authority so that we have less sort of disuniformity around the country in the way elections are conducted and the voting rules that are applied and so forth? So not knowing exactly the sense in which the question was asked, in the first case, I'm not sure what you can do to prevent elections from being nationalized in that sense. In the question of whether or not you can have a sort of more centralized administration of elections, if that's another sense in which the term has come up, I don't think that's likely to happen anytime soon, because there's just a powerful commitment in this country to sort of state and local control of the electoral process. We have close to 10,000 different voting jurisdictions in the United States. Ideal on a drawing board? No, but it's very much a fixture of and a feature of our American electoral process.
This question, I think, gets to the heart of your book and the memoir part of it. What has been your biggest challenge in your career?
The biggest challenge in my career. I suppose that, and I saw this at the government level, I think this is true of day-to-day law practice, I think it's true in politics. If you're swept up in the immediacy of a problem that you have a job of helping to solve, that's what you're there for, whether it's giving advice to a client or as a government official, facilitating the adoption of policies that your principal, your president is advancing. The biggest challenge is taking a step back. By the way, I don't only mean an ethical step back, but just a step back and having an opportunity to reflect, as opposed to being, particularly in this frenetic news cycle that we're in, with fractured news media and, of course, in a polarized politics, the intensity of disagreement and debate, and having that quiet moment where you think, what should I be trying to accomplish here? What are my short-term goals? And what should I be thinking about for the long term as well? So that you're not just on Monday solving Monday's problems or trying to, or on Wednesday solving Wednesday's problems or trying to, but you're trying to step back and both understand a little bit or question yourself a little bit about how you're framing the issues that you're immediately addressing, but also having the time to think a little bit longer term across a broader horizon. And when you're in the thick of political competition or the thick of government administration, if you're in the hothouse environment of the White House, achieving that distance can be very difficult to do.
Thank you. In the 5 decades plus that you've been involved in politics, is what's happening truly unprecedented? Is it too late for any serious legal intervention?
Well, it depends. Of course, it depends entirely on what you mean by legal intervention. You know, Americans do have this thought that if there's a problem, it's likely to be solved or could be solved by some kind of legal intervention. You know, bring the lawyers in, file the lawsuits. And I think in a democratic culture, the viability, the success of the process by which we solve these problems can't rest entirely just on applying laws or passing new ones that you think are suddenly necessary to fix the problem that you're trying to fix. I talk in the book a lot about legal reform. There's a huge place for legal reform and continuous debates about legal reform and innovative legal reform, and legal reform in particular that helps us keep pace with the changes in our politics. Our politics have changed dramatically. The way that people obtain information has changed dramatically. The nation is changing in ways that sort of affects the way the political process operates. And so there's always a reason to look at reforms, for sure, across a whole range of issues. But I don't think the answer lies, and I think that made that clear entirely, in the sort of coming up with new laws, devising new legal interventions, if you will, letting the lawyers loose. I think they have a role to play, but I think that ultimately it's an active and engaged citizenry that really cares about their democracy that in a variety of ways, including some that I've mentioned here, are going to make the difference. As to how serious, I should mention one thing, is this serious? When I lived through the Watergate episode and I read that story about, you know, Nixon's resignation and Gerald Ford ascending to the presidency, that was a very, very dark chapter in American political history. So at that time, we thought we'd never seen anything quite like it, or at least in my lifetime I hadn't, and I was very young then. What we're facing now is extremely challenging, but can I say that it is so challenging I don't imagine that we can come out of it the way we came out of Watergate? No, I think we can come out of it, but it is certainly nothing that I expected. I'll just say I was a lawyer to President Obama's campaign. I represented him when he was in the Senate. If you had told me in January of 2009, when President Obama was inaugurated, that the politics of the country would be where they are today, I would have not believed it.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about where some of the energy is with respect to those legal thoughts on election reform. Is it campaign finance? Is it gerrymandering? Is it the Electoral College? Is it in some other area? Or is it kind of just scholars thinking about many different ways that we might make our elections better?
Yes. First of all, just like there are a lot of lawyers, there are a lot of law professors, so I'm giving you fair warning. And they're spending a lot of time thinking about these issues, specialists in precisely questions of law and democracy and political reform. And I'll just name something. You know, we've had debates about campaign finance, we've had debates about the Electoral College, those debates will continue. But think, for example, about the range of new issues that have been raised about voting rights in the United States. I mentioned the litigation, but we've also had, you know, some extraordinary developments in the law of democracy as it affects voter participation, and some of them have been brought about by both legislation, but also litigation against legislation and other forms of contestation that are meant to change the way that the voting process works. Another example is ranked choice voting. You know, 15, 20 years ago, that wasn't really that hot a topic of conversation. There was certainly literature on the topic, and there were jurisdictions that were prepared to experiment with it. But ranked choice voting is something that's attracted a lot of attention. And of course, there have been experiments in ranked choice voting, applications of ranked choice voting in jurisdictions around the country that are being evaluated. So there's a whole list of political reforms. I teach an entire course on this, and it's like a lightning round. I try to get from one to the other in 13 weeks, and I'm leaving a lot of stuff out.
Ordinarily, enemies do not share power, though there have been exceptions. Please speak about how this affects governance, especially after decades of exacerbating polarization.
So the opening line, enemies don't share power, and again, I'm going to be somewhat interpreting. I hope I'm being somewhat responsive to the question. First of all, as I said earlier, I think we don't want to view our opponents as our enemies, and any politician who refers to the enemy, I think, has engaged in disqualifying rhetoric. I just think that's not how we should think about that. But they can, while not sharing power in the sense that we don't have like coalition governments. I mean, occasionally a Democrat will put a Republican in a Democratic administration, and a Republican will put a Democrat in a Republican administration, but there's not a sort of coalition power sharing arrangement in American politics. But the two parties have to work together. I think about the United States Congress when I think about that the parties have representatives in the House and the Senate who, in order for those institutions to function, have to be willing to negotiate resolutions of issues in ways that permit work to get done, for the institutions to be productive, to meet public expectation. So it's harder and harder. I gave an example in my book of what polarization can do, gathering, intensifying polarization. At an early stage, when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House of Representatives, the relations between the leadership in the House on the Democratic side and on the Republican side were so poisoned that very little communication was taking place at the leadership level. The communication was taking place between staffs who were sort of organizing business on the floor of the House and had to talk for that process to satisfy House rules. But for leaders not to talk to each other across a partisan divide when what they share or should share is at a minimum, a foundational, not just a minimum, a foundational commitment to the institution itself, I think is a massive failure of leadership in a democratic society. So it's not power sharing, but is the willingness to recognize there are points of intersection between the two parties, but at a minimum, institutional commitments that they have to make on a shared basis for the democracy to function.
Thank you. You spoke earlier about an attorney who often represents Republican politicians that you met in 1982, and how in the midst of your zealous advocacy, you also share commitments to maintaining the structures that allow democracy to continue forward. The next question wonders what happens when election lawyers seek statutory changes that benefit one political party or one political ideology. It seems to get to the heart of your ethics work and the conversations that you're having with your students.
Yes. So what we do, I actually have a section about political lawyering. We talk about government lawyering and the work that lawyers also do in the political process, and then we talk about non-lawyer government officials and the ethical challenges that they face. The two political parties, if you just take recent American political history and the advent of Donald Trump out of the debate for a moment, have had for many, many years very different views of how to structure a voting system that reflects democratic values and possesses the requisite integrity. Really very different views. The Republicans have put more emphasis on preventing fraud, and the Democrats have put more emphasis on promoting access. And as you know, Republicans often respond by saying, you're promoting access in a way that also promotes fraud. And so their view of voting rules is different. Democrats tend to want to make voting rules more flexible, more generally available to people in a wide variety of different life circumstances. So they support generous early voting and same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration and a whole host of other, if you will, voters facilitating rules. And there are conservative Republicans who are not Trumpite in reflection who just fundamentally disagree that that's what we ought to be doing. They don't think voting should be quote-unquote easy. Fine. So they can dispute that, and they can litigate over those issues. They can fight in state legislatures over whether there should be mail voting, or there should be early voting, or how much early voting there should be, or the rules for mail voting. Those fights I don't think are inappropriate. I don't think at bottom they're unethical. But again, we're talking about ethics, so there are limits. And if at some point these differences deteriorate in such a way that, say, those who profess to be worried about fraud are waging war on voters and looking to disenfranchise whole communities of voters in the name of protecting against quote-unquote fraud, which, as you know, is vanishingly rare in American political life, then I think an ethical line has been crossed. Then I think partisanship or ideological fervor has overflown its boundaries, and the actions of lawyers who are prepared to do that are unethical. And by the way, some of them, in the wake of 2020, have lost their law licenses because of it. Rudy Giuliani can't practice law. I don't think that's a desperate loss to the profession. And there are others who have participated in the lawyering of which he became infamous, who are also fighting for their professional lives, and I think that's as it should be.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. This one gets at whether biased and angry partisan media presents an ethical issue in American politics.
It absolutely does. I think that, and I don't know why there'd be any ground of disagreement. Those who have responsibility for gathering and reporting the news and helping inform the choices and opinions that are available to American citizens have ethical responsibilities. Look, they're under competitive pressures too. They're under tremendous competitive pressures. We all know and have seen what has happened to the news industry at both the national and the state and local level. And those competitive pressures necessarily push them in certain directions, or certainly create stresses that in turn can undermine or make less likely the fully ethical choice that they make. But they have that responsibility. I mean, it's a public responsibility. You're a news organization. There are certain constitutional protections that attach to the work that you do. There are norms that I think argue in favor of strong protections, even short of legal protections, for those who are involved in the critical work of the media. But that responsibility is not one-sided. It's not just a responsibility to the media, it's a responsibility of the media. That applies to social media platforms. That applies to major news organizations at the national level. It applies to anyone who describes themselves as journalists who are out there either through opinion making or through news analysis and dissemination. Applies to anyone who's in that line of work because they have a significant effect on the operation of the democratic process. So I don't think they're at all exempt from the discussion of what ethical responsibility requires of people who have that kind of role in our public life.
We might be able to sneak in 2 more questions. Supreme Court opinions are long and complicated. There's the majority opinion, and often there are justices who agree with the outcome but would reach it for a different reason. There's dissenters and everything else. What steps might be taken to make the Supreme Court's decisions more accessible to everyday Americans?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, these, just as sometimes doctors write prescriptions that are completely illegible, but they don't write much. I can make out much of what the court's saying, but it just goes on too long. And there's an enormous amount of complexity that is just going to be inaccessible to a wider public that may be interested in, for example, what they meant in a monumental decision like the one that involved presidential immunity recently decided by the court. Opinions used to be shorter. I think opinions could be shorter. And I think there are perhaps other ways that the court could help translate for the public what it is that they are in fact saying, because here is a challenge for the court. Much of what people learn about the court, much of what they understand about opinions that the courts produce, they understand through intermediaries. They understand it through commentators. They understand it through news organizations. that are describing, summarizing, trying to capture the essence of what happened, and sometimes through a partisan or an ideological lens. And so that compounds the problem that the opaqueness of the court's process, that compounds the problem of the opaqueness of that process, because there's another layer of interpretation, analysis, and the like that people do come to rely on in trying to understand what the court says. And I think those people who do comment on court opinions and describe what the court is doing, characterize their motives, whatever, also bear significant responsibility because a lot of people rely on them for their understanding of what the Supreme Court is doing.
And finally, send us home on a high note here.
Pardon me?
Send us home on a high note.
Okay. Okay.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of American democracy?
Or somewhere in between. Yeah. Look, I'm going to answer the question through my own personal experience. You know, I might be too old to answer that question wisely. I'll return to what my experience was as a young man growing up, my family experience and whatever. I think that we have a much wider, generally shared commitment to democratic values in the country than the current political debate allows us to see. I really do. Those conversations have to take place. I think they're going to be hard. There are going to be some who don't want to enter into the conversation at all. But my own sense of it is that at the end of the day, there is something so precious in the democratic heritage that people fundamentally recognize they don't want to lose. Hopefully, and this is the challenge, they will have a leadership, both at the national level and at the state and local level. They'll have a leadership that encourages their best instincts and does not lead them down a very dark path.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob Bauer, for joining us today at the Westminster Town Hall Forum. We invite those of you here in person to join us in Westminster Hall for breads and spreads. Just outside the sanctuary, you can purchase a copy of Mr. Bauer's book. There's also a table where you can have your copy autographed. Thank you all so much for being with us, and please join us again at Westminster Town Hall Forum.